Super Bomberman, a series that has been spanning the globe for over 30 years now. Very interesting in its simple plot line of blowing things up to save the world. And while that sounds kind of wacky, it's not even the wackiest plot I've ever heard of. Admittedly, Bomberman was never a part of my childhood, so the majority of the content I was familiar with was Super Bomberman R and R2, as I have one of those games, the former, on my Switch, and I play it. I've never played any of the older games, but after reviewing its gameplay and doing extensive amounts of research, I can conclude that even today people would love the original Super Bomberman gameplay. While Konami continues, even to this present day, to extend the life of the Bomberman franchise, what it fails to understand is that even now, the older gameplay would probably make it a little bit more successful, and here's the reasons why I think that the old Bomberman content is still pretty good. Not to hate on the newer content at all, I still think the newer content's great, but there's a charm about the older content that the newer one just doesn't have. For starters, the gameplay of Bomberman, especially the older games, is quite simple. You run around, you place a bomb, you duck away from its blast, it explodes, and you destroy enemies. That's pretty much the majority of its gameplay. And while the gameplay itself is quite simple, I think this makes for something much easier to consume. The graphics to the game as well, the pixelated look that happens when you play something on the SNES, I feel like those graphics should be brought back, as I feel like Bomberman definitely makes them work. I never thought of it before, but the older graphics, especially after observing them closely, make the Bomberman art style work the best. Enjoying pieces of media at face value used to be much easier back in the day, and that's because a lot of more immersive content existed back then. In this present day, it's a little harder to enjoy something at face value, and you have to enjoy it rather as a piece of media, and it mostly aims to cater towards specific groups. Whereas Bomberman is just kind of there. He's doing his own little thing, especially in the older games, and it's very obvious that it's not really trying to adhere to anything, so it's much easier to enjoy at face value. What I mean by this is, you can just play the game and enjoy the gameplay. You don't really have to look too deep into anything to understand what's happening, and you can therefore enjoy it at face value. Whereas the majority of newer media almost requires a whole research team to work out what's happening. And sometimes content is dumbed down for people to understand and attempt to get them to enjoy things at face value as they once did. But Bomberman definitely does this without needing to do pretty much anything the present day media does. While I've already talked about the simplicity of its gameplay making it easier to consume, I can definitely say that about the plot as well. There's very little plot, and sometimes you'll get a cutscene or two before the game begins, but that's about as far as plot goes. However, this gives you a lot less to think about and more time to actually enjoy the game, as I've already said, at face value. The newer Bomberman games do have more cutscenes where they talk about the stories of the characters or what's happening around them, but what this does make for is more things to keep on top of if you're invested in the lore. However, in the older games, when they give you that one cutscene, that's all you needed to charge an entire game. And not gonna lie, I kind of preferred it that way, because like I said before, media that does such is much easier to consume and easier to enjoy at face value. Overall, Bomberman is a very classic game. It's been spanning the globe for over 30 years, and although Konami continues to push out Bomberman-related content, nothing compares to the original 5 SNES games, as they feel more like what Bomberman was intended to be, rather than what Bomberman turned into. And while there's nothing wrong with the newer games, the older games have a much simpler kind of charm to them that still works very effectively to this day. They can be enjoyed at face value much easier than the majority of content now. Its gameplay is fun and easy, making it easier to consume, and that same logic applies to its plot as well, which is very simple to consume. It also leaves a lot less room for continuity errors, which I notice a lot in media, even the newer Bomberman games, mind you. So as I said, the older content's pretty good. I think that with those reasonings, it's probably a lot better than the newer content.